Welcome to Inside the Mavs. Mavs insider Kevin Gray alongside Mavs beat reporter for DallasBasketball.com, Sports Illustrated, Grant Abseth. Welcome to the official first episode of Inside the Mavs. Really appreciate everyone joining us here, however you may be joining us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts for free. Make sure you download, subscribe to it, give it a 5-star rating, write a review while you're there also, and let us know how we're doing. And we're so excited to bring this to you. Obviously, a big night as we're recording this, the Dallas Mavericks and the number 10 overall pick. Before we get into that, Grant, what's up, man? I know you're in Chicago. How's it feel inside the Mavs first episode, man?
Yeah, it was a cool experience to kind of be around a lot of like higher profile NBA like media and like seeing like representatives of the lottery and all that stuff. It's a cool experience, and it's always better when the team you're there for I'm sure keeps their pick and it's not like boring afterwards. So yeah, that was a good outcome for sure.
And of course, the intrigue going into the NBA Draft Lottery was whether or not the Mavericks. By the way, this is going to be on YouTube as well. You can go to Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube. Grant's got his YouTube channel as well. You'll be able to see it on both channels there, so you'll be able to check out the podcast there as well for Inside the Mavs. For those who are wondering, say, hey, is it going to be on video? Yes, it's going to be on video as well as anywhere you get your podcast for free. But at the same time, the Mavericks, the intrigue going into the Draft Lottery was whether or not they would keep the number 10 overall pick, because if they did not and the pick fell between 11 and 14, they would have sent it to Jalen Brunson and company in New York as the final piece of the Kristaps Porzingis trade. Grant, you being there, what was kind of the feeling in the room as the night started to unfold with the draft lottery itself? And then, of course, the Mavericks waiting. Nico Harrison, the representative for the Dallas Mavericks, the president and general manager for the Mavericks, was the representative. What was the feeling in the room like as the pick started to be unveiled?
Yeah, I think when you get from like 14, 13, and 12, and then you get to that 11, all you need to do is see the non-Mavs envelope or logo on the envelope open, and yeah, it was a little interesting. And then Nico Harrison, when we talked to him after the lottery, he said, as you'd expect, he was relieved. Like you see the right envelope kind of transpire for you. I guess if you didn't see 10, like the Mavs logo after the 10, the 10 envelopes open, that means they would have picked in the top 4, which would have been ideal. But, at least just, again, as we keep saying, not losing that pick was definitely at least the bare minimum kind of expectation. There was like a 65% chance of them staying at 10, so it wasn't like unexpected, but yeah, I think it was it wasn't like the best outcome or winning the lottery, like quite literally not winning the lottery, but at least you have something to work with in the off season for sure.
Yeah, that's because the winners of the draft lottery, of course, for the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes were the San Antonio Spurs. And for the third time in franchise history, a generational big man coming to San Antonio. Of course, they had David Robinson transition to Tim Duncan, and now Victor Wembanyama is going to be a San Antonio Spur. Before we finish, or continue with the Mavericks, obviously, let's just touch on that, because I was saying to you before we got started that it feels like that's probably the best place. I know Mavs fans won't necessarily want to hear that, but that's probably the best place for Victor Wembanyama to go, given the amount of experience that this organization has had with international players, specifically Frenchmen, when it comes to Tony Parker, Boris Diaw, and others. Obviously, for San Antonio, a generational player that's coming to them, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I feel like they have a lot of defensive versatility too. That'll be interesting as they develop their other young players like Jeremy Sohan, Devin Vassell. Keldon Johnson gets at the rim as well. Like they have a lot of interesting pieces on the wing. I think they still need like that foundational backcourt, kind of like lead guard, if you will. But yeah, like so far, it's like a lot of already like intriguing pieces around him to kind of like put pressure on the defense. And to build an intriguing defense of your own. And I think like like smaller market, like being out like like a super big limelight or whatever you want to call it. That seems to fit his personality, a little bit better than had he ended up in like, there wasn't really a lot that were in contention like big
Sure.
market, but like like I think that I think like when you think about what would be the perfect fit, I think that definitely does check from top to bottom, and then of course Greg Popovich doesn't hurt to be able to have Greg Popovich as your coach. So yeah, like a lot to like about that fit for sure.
Well, they've got a brand new facility that they're going to be completing here within the next month or so to welcome Victor Wembanyama to. And I'm sure Tony Parker, Boris Diaw, who of course been San Antonio Spurs in the past, and others are going to be welcoming him with open arms. So we know who's going number 1 overall in June when it comes to Victor Wembanyama and where he's going. But obviously for the Mavericks, the biggest thing that you had mentioned, just keeping the number 10 overall pick. And you had a chance to talk to Nico Harrison afterwards. Obviously, the biggest thing, keeping the pick and now moving forward. What did he have to say about all of this and how the Mavericks now will look to move forward with knowing where they're going to be drafting, or if they decide to possibly move that to try and acquire a veteran player of some sort?
Yeah, when because there was a recent report, I believe, from Mark Stein on his Substack about like, the expectation if they were to keep the 10th pick would be to trade for a veteran. Like expectations definitely not like definitive plan. So it's not like that's outright saying that that's 100% going to happen. But I just asked Nico just in general about like the trade rumors that have kind of been associated with if they did keep that 10th pick. And, he said, I was going to ask you to give me the trade speculation. So maybe I can add it to my board. I don't know anything about the trade rumors. We got to look at every possible scenario. So we'll do that for sure. But the ultimate kind of irony about that is that in my article photo, because it's just from like me using my iPhone taking a video, in the background, Mark Stein, I didn't realize this at the time, but he's standing right there. So it's even funnier. It's like, I'm not aware of the trade rumor. It's like the guy who wrote it is like literally right next to him. So I thought that was kind of funny, a little extra on there for sure.
What else did he have to say with respect to this? I'm sure a very taxing process is. There was a lot of controversy around what the Mavericks did toward the end of the season, being significantly fined by the NBA for sitting players and getting or trying to protect the pick, obviously. What did he have to say about how this process has been to even get to this point, if he discussed that?
Yeah, I think he said, for his actual quote for sure, he said, about landing the 10th pick. He said, relieved once it got to that 11th pick. And I knew we would at least get the 10th pick. So I think, as you'd expect, like relieved is kind of the theme there. But as far as like, I was interested about like what he kind of views as the areas to improve, like specifically with defense. Because, at the exit interview with the media, he just kind of like, a general statement about defense. But last year he said, highlighted rim protection. But I want to know like on-ball defense was an issue as well. So I was like, like it was short answer, but I asked like, is on-ball defense and rim protection, are those both areas that you see as being needs to address this offseason? He said, I think both. So at least there's like it's not like he's not gonna tell me like what players he likes at the combine, or like who he's thinking about on his trade board or anything like that. But it's just kind of it's good to gain insight on like there's more areas to defense that are potentially going to be looked at than just like adding a rim protector. And so yeah, that'll be something to watch for sure.
Yeah, because obviously we lamented how poor this defense was, not just from a rim protection standpoint, but their inability to guard on the perimeter, which made things that much more easy for opponents to be able to get to the rim. And when you start looking at what this team needs, 3-and-D wings, their ability to find some type of big man, there's a lot of options there that they could possibly utilize. And now with the number 10 pick in hand, what does that start to look like? Other teams like Detroit, maybe Indiana. There's a lot of teams that you look at and say, what kind of resources do those teams have to offer that the Mavericks could possibly take advantage of? And now looking at what they have in terms of free agency, the biggest piece signing Kyrie Irving, getting him back into the fold. Nico Harrison saying that there's a lot of options here. what does that begin to look like as Mavs fans start to think about, okay, now that the number 10 pick is in hand, what kind of intriguing options, even with a weak free agency class, could that look like? Because for me, it sounds like the trade market is going to be where things are going to happen for this team if they're able to make some type of move, even with the limited resources that they have available to them.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think when you're kind of running on that short window or urgent timeline, if you will, I think you definitely have to explore the trade market. But then it gets a little complicated on like what's that one like main swing that you can take, since you don't really have like the 13 first round picks like the Utah Jazz or the Thunder. I think since they did keep the pick, they can move their 2027 first round pick like outright. You can use some swaps when it's outside of the 2024, 2025 like kind of protected range that they still have to kind of abide by and account for with that final first round pick that's owed to the Knicks for the Porzingis trade. So they could theoretically do like a 2026 swap or like 2028 swap. But aside from that, those don't really have that same value as like a unprotected first. So I think like depending on the contracts you're going to move, they don't really have the best valued contracts. So like if you were to package that 2027 first round pick with like whatever they could salary match, if you're going to add in a young player you already have to add value, that takes away from what you have as a team as well. So it's like, what's that, that like ability to address like, rim protection and add that perimeter defense. That'll be an interesting thing to kind of balance out. I'm sure there's some like, veterans that are kind of falling out of favor with their particular team. Like one that just jumps out on top of my head is like a Robert Covington. He wasn't really getting minutes with the Clippers, and like he doesn't make a ton of money, like an untradeable amount. So that could be like those types of guys like you can identify or potentially look to trade. Maybe not a first round pick for, but at least like get creative with identifying opportunities that wouldn't be costly with trade assets for sure.
And as we start to look at it, let's just for conversation's sake, as we're here today, because the prevailing thought is that the Mavericks are going to try and move this pick and try to get some veteran help, immediate help for Luka Doncic, presuming Kyrie Irving is back for this team also. But let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say the Mavericks do decide to keep the number 10 overall pick. Is there a player or two that you look at and say, look, whether it be a Hendricks from, Central Florida, whether it be a Grady Dick from Kansas, is there a player that fits a profile that could be there at 10 that would maybe be enticing for you if you were to keep the pick, if you were the Mavericks there?
Yeah, I think what you probably try to look for if you're the Mavs is kind of along the lines of what we talked about in that first, like that pilot episode about the defense, where you try to find someone that may have potential to be that kind of like foundational piece to your unit, like whether it's like a rim protector or someone who's like a versatile like switch defender who can kind of make those like help rotations, like a Draymond Green kind of type of skill set at the 4, or like a impactful on ball just wing defender who can play the 3 with some size. Like those would probably be the ideal like kind of archetypes, if you will, that you would look for. And because those players are very challenging to find, and they don't really have second round picks to kind of like easily maneuver back into that second round of this year's draft, because they traded 2 seconds last year, future seconds, to get the 37th pick to take Jaden Hardy. But now for the next 7 years, they don't have any seconds. You can buy your way in, but it's like it's not as easy when you can't just like package 2 future ones as easily. So I think like if you can find someone who fits any of those types of skill sets at 10 overall, I think that could be worth consideration. Having a player on a rookie contract with how restrictive the CBA will be getting in the near future with like, the second apron taking away your taxpayer MLE to be able to use. That is something you probably should, take into consideration. Like if we add one of those players like on a rookie contract that can make a difference, is that, like with the savings that we have with our spending, could that be worth, the patience that would be required to kind of get them acclimated to the NBA? or do we take a higher salaried player? And, I guess in a way you also have to calculate the risk of that trade. Like Christian Wood last year, required the 26th overall pick. So like even like trading, an asset, if you take a swing and you miss on a veteran, that's a really rough outcome, especially 2 years in a row with those picks and one being a lottery pick. Like you don't really have a way to rectify that in the near future. So that's, all those are layers, to consider for sure.
Names that I've seen floated around on Mavs Twitter as we're looking at the number 10 overall pick if they wanted to keep it. I've seen names like Cam Whitmore from Villanova, as we mentioned, Hendricks from University of Central Florida, Grady Dick from Kansas, some of those names being floated out there. I will say, because I was talking to someone about the idea of DeAndre Ayton, speaking to somebody within the organization about whether or not DeAndre Ayton would be an option. And they obviously like the idea of the pick and roll thing with Luka Doncic and what he can do there offensively. But there's just real concerns about what he is and where he is mentally, and his reputation right now, not the best in the league, according to the person who I talked to, and how that would figure into a possible decision, because we're talking about a distressed asset possibly in Ayton. Now, this situation has changed a little bit because Monty Williams is no longer the head coach in Phoenix. So there could be a different outcome and different outlook for him, given who was brought in as the next head coach there. But I think for Mavs fans or some of them who may want a DeAndre Ayton, there's still a little bit of question there on what he would look like in terms of effort at times, which we saw be questioned during the playoffs itself. But it seems like, based on what we know right now, a veteran is in the works for the Mavericks, or at least it should be in the works for those who are on the outside looking in, based on some of the limitations that you're talking about from a collective bargaining agreement standpoint, and more importantly, the lack of assets that they have right now to try and even do something, I would say.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think, DeAndre Ayton in particular, if you want to use him as an example, making over $30 million per year, like that type of player, you definitely have to strongly weigh like what you believe would be that potential, like the mental focus, everything that you said. Especially if you were to part with that pick, because that's a lot of salary. Like you're already paying supermax, to Luka, and then assuming you're going to pay a hefty price. I don't know about a max. I would imagine Kyrie Irving wants a max. If you're going to pay very close to that, if not a max, that's a lot of total salary. You have to be very confident that that big three, if you will, not a true big three, because I wouldn't, we're not a perennial all-star. I think it's tough, but a spending big three, I guess you could say. You'd have to have a lot of confidence in DeAndre Ayton, and I think moving the 10th pick while taking on that salary, I just feel like, you'd have to be a big DeAndre Ayton fan for sure. That's a lot of risk. That's a lot of risk to take on. I'm just envisioning like I know they share representation, Ayton, Luka with Bill Duffy, and that could help. Naturally being involved in the offense as a pick and roll recipient, that would help stay engaged defensively. But yeah, it's. I don't know. I feel like Jason Kidd, if you look at his coaching kind of track record, I don't know if you necessarily want to bank on the kind of connective relationship, if you will, of a guy who kind of went through that soured relationship with a coach with an old school mentality. I feel like that adds more factors to kind of take into consideration when you're evaluating the risk for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like especially if Monty Williams had not been fired in Phoenix, that there could have been a change of scenery for DeAndre, and it still could be given his situation there, but there could be something different in the works for him, given what kind of new coach may be able to see what kind of vision that he has for Ayton in that group when it comes to Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. But obviously for the Mavericks, a big night when it comes to this draft lottery. A lot of expectations now going into the rest of this offseason. The biggest thing, keeping this pick. And for you now, as you look at how this season has wrapped up, obviously a very disappointing season for this team. Luka Doncic still made first team All-NBA for the fourth straight year. whether or not Kyrie Irving is back. The expectation is that Christian Wood will not be back with this team this upcoming year. What would you look at as an ideal scenario, trade scenario, whether it be packaging a Tim Hardaway type of contract where he's got a descending one that could be attractive for teams, and what you're wanting to put together with this number 10 overall pick to try and move it to get a veteran? What does that package look like for you if you were to put one together?
Yeah, I think if you're to kind of evaluate the team needs, like we touched on ball defense and protection, both of those are definitely needs. And in terms of particulars, the quickest way I feel like in general to improve a defense is probably to have that rim protector. Like that's not a fix everything, because if let's say like a Miles Turner is rotating over to block a shot, like you got to have people clean up, like help the helper, all that stuff, and like. You kind of see some of the teams in the playoffs, like for example, New York with Mitchell Robinson, they gave the Cavs a lot of problems being able to handle on the glass. But then they had problems with Miami in the following round, because it's like you're only as good as like your on-ball containment allows you to be as a rim protector. So I think in general, whatever's harder to find, I think that's probably the better route to take. Like you can find some serviceable on-ball defenders. I think when you get to a certain tier of player, like an OG Anunoby, you're kind of operating out of your realm of like gettable players, like realistic targets. But like if someone like a shot blocker is available that can kind of do some switching. Maybe you have to take on a salary that may not be the best or something in a trade, whatever it may be. Like, I think that may be a good starting point, and then see if you can find some serviceable veterans. Like, like we alluded to Robert Covington earlier, like not if that's a particular like perfect option or anything, but just someone like that who's not making like, $20 million, just around the ballpark of what you'd have to send out with your contracts, ideally on your books. If you're the Mavs, I think it's tough to say. Like you got to count on probably Reggie Bullock contributing next year. Josh Green developing. Like it's tough to move a wing for a wing, I guess is my point. Like, so you probably have to find a bigger sized guy, like again, Robert Covington, like that type of guy. And that rim protector at the bare minimum. And I think there's probably more serviceable vets that you don't have to trade a haul for to fill that 4 spot, as opposed to the rim protector. So I guess just canvassing rim protectors would probably be the starting point, just seeing if there's a gettable guy that can really kind of elevate your group. But still acknowledging that you need to patch up the rest, because you can't go Utah Jazz, Rudy Gobert, as the Mavs really fully illustrated themselves. You gotta patch up the other areas for sure.
Yeah, because his team is in a tough position because they're not really in a position, especially if they do retain Kyrie Irving, to take on salary. So even with a free agency class, if you're looking, for example, for 3-and-D guys like a Jeremy Grant from Portland, who's going to be available this summer, you're not really in a position to take on what could be $20 to $25 million a year for a player of his caliber, even if you wanted to bring in that type of player. So finding some veterans within the trade market, it sounds like will be the best way to go for this team. Again, with limited resources, though, you've got to be kind of creative. But for me, Grant, I'm not going to lie to you. The contracts of Tim Hardaway Jr., descending contract, for me, the contract that they've got to find a way to get off of, Davis Bertans. I mean, I know they were able to obviously split it up, in acquiring Spencer Dinwiddie and Bertans in exchange for Kristaps Porzingis. Worked out in terms of moving on for Porzingis' contract. But really, at this point, not seeing the kind of value based off of what even limited what he's able to bring in terms of a three-point shooter. Not a lot there to command, a $17-18 million a year salary that still has a couple of years left going on it for the next, 2 seasons or so for the Mavericks. To me, that's the contract they got to find a way to get off of. The question is, who would be wanting to take that particular contract in that case, and what's your packaging to move it along with?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, especially when we're talking about like needs, and one of those needs is a four that was some versatility. Like he's supposed to be playing the four and providing impact. Like you can't have that much salary going towards that position at another guy and then pay like $30+ million for the four spot, and you don't really have like a real difference maker. Like then you're kind of building a team that you know doesn't really have like the necessary pieces around like the Luka and the Kyrie and whoever else you bring in with that 10th pick. So I think, yeah, I definitely think, as we get closer to that free agency period, the draft, it'll be interesting to see what names kind of pop up as available in the trade market. I think there will be things that heat up naturally because everyone's going to be having to really focus on that second tax apron. Teams like the Warriors, Clippers, especially like that, are really spending high payrolls. If you're not playing somebody and they're making like 13, 12, 11, $10 million, whatever it may be, you really have to consider moving that player. And then it becomes a matter of, those teams don't want to take on Thomas Bertans. So you got to get creative with the three-team scenarios and find a rebuilding team. Maybe like we touched on the Spurs earlier. They're going to need to get to the salary cap floor. They could be a team that may be interested in getting compensated to take on that type of contract. But then you also have to think about, like, am I parting with value just to move off of somebody? How is that also helping my team get better when I'm limited on assets? So like if you're using the 10th pick to trade for a vet and you do get better that way, but you're using your last tradable first round pick to move off of somebody, that's tough. So maybe you have to take back like also someone who's not that favorable of a contract, but maybe isn't quite as bad as Davis Bertans, and just hope that maybe a team with some connection, like some front office or coach that likes Davis Bertans, like with San Antonio. He started like he spent some time there. Maybe that's an idea. They might need some shooting. Some team like that out there, you got to hope the stars align for you a little bit with the third team scenarios for sure. But yeah, that's just a general thought for sure. Like you're not going to get like the Jeremy Grant, like you said, like those types of guys. Like that's like you're dealing with a hard cap if you're bringing back Kyrie Irving as well. So you kind of have to work within your own like contracts and really closely match salary to make something work legally. And then like Tim Hardaway probably has more favorable value, obviously, than a Bertans. So maybe depending on what you can get for him, that will definitely be important to get a positive return if you're going to move him. And not to go too much into it, but like if you're building around a team that ideally has Kyrie and Luka, you need more size at the three and the four. Like you can't have a Tim Hardaway and a Josh Green be your only like and Reggie Bullock sliding to the four. Like that's not really viable. So I definitely think as you mentioned, Bertans also like we can throw in Hardaway as probably one of those guys that you would ideally look to move to kind of reconfigure a roster that you didn't start last season with. Like the assumption was they're going to be big like on the perimeter, like Spencer Dinwiddie, Luka. Like now that's not really the reality, and it's very hard to kind of reconfigure things with the blockbuster like February whatever trade. Now it's time to really like kind of shift things around appropriately where it fits in the summer for sure.
Yeah, for this team, the assets and what they're able to utilize is limited, but at the same time, there could be creative ways to be able to make some of this happen. And bringing back Kyrie Irving to me is the foundation of all of this, and then building from there to try and figure out the best way to move forward. There are plenty of guys that you look at on this team and you look at their salary cap situation. It's going to be a little tough to be able to figure this out. But if anything, and I'm sure for Mavericks fans, the thing that they don't want to see happen is them move off of a Jaden Hardy or a Josh Green, two young foundational pieces. While, yes, you have some assets that are, tradable in terms of, a nice contract with Tim Hardaway, for example, those are probably the two quote unquote best assets that you have right now, and Josh Green and Jaden Hardy. The problem is they're also part of your foundation moving forward as well. And if you move off of them, I'm sure that's going to be a pretty hefty price to be able to try to find a veteran, and really takes away some of the things that you were able to accomplish based on some of their growth that you saw this past year.
Yeah, and if it doesn't work out, that's such a bad outcome. Like that's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of risk. Like you're kind of shoveling coal into the furnace, if you will, or whatever you want to call it. Like more and more and more. Like you can't. Like at some point, you got to like really evaluate like the next like three years, even like the spending, like the trajectory of young players, like you for a team that entered last year with a lot of like around 30, a little over 30 role players. They're kind of like limited athletes for the most part, and like lower kind of like not like low potential guys, but like not like star potential, like dynamic guys. Like you can't really move off of those young players that have the ability to tap into a ceiling like that, because then you end up almost shuffling around to rebuild the same like kind of like limited like ceiling, like unless it's the right deal, like if it's the right deal, it's the right deal. Like you're getting a difference maker. But unless it's truly that type of a deal, yeah, you definitely have to be careful for sure.
As we get ready to end this first episode, our first official episode of Inside the Mavs here, what was your biggest takeaway from the night? Obviously in Chicago, the Mavericks keeping the number 10 overall pick, Victor Wembanyama, going to be the number 1 overall pick going to San Antonio. I think for Mavericks fans, not moving up once again. History continues to trend that way, that they've never moved up in the draft based on their lottery odds that they had going into it. Your biggest takeaway from being there in Chicago, the atmosphere, taking it all in, what Nico Harrison had to say and everything else. What was for you that moment or collection of moments that happened for the draft lottery?
Yeah, I think honestly, the organic reactions that you kind of hear from people when like picks are being read, like I think the big one was Detroit at 5. Like people were like, "Oof!" Like ouch! Like like Bobby Marks sitting a couple of seats over, and he's reacting, to a pit, like some your envelope being opened, and it's like, yeah, ouch! Like that's like
Yeah, because
hearing
they
that.
thought they were going to be in the top 3 for sure.
Yeah, like you go through a season like that, like you shut down Cade Cunningham, and it's like 5th overall. It's like, yes, that's a rough outcome. I think Houston falling to 4, you can still
Mm-hmm.
get a good player, intriguing prospect, but like that's like when you're seeing Scoot Henderson jersey swaps, and you're like thinking, oh well, I mean, we don't get Wembanyama. I mean, Scoot Henderson. I mean, I kind of like him better anyways. It's like some guys like that. Like you're already coping with not getting the first pick before the lottery day. Like I've seen that a little bit from some people who kind of keep tabs on the Rockets, and then it's like, well, not he's not an option either now. So it's like now you gotta like
Yeah.
sell yourself on another reality there a little bit. Like that type of stuff is always interesting. But I think just how much talent in the Southwest Division is definitely something that's very like kind of interesting to think about. Like like Zion struggled to stay healthy, but a top overall pick. If he can figure out kind of like Joel Embiid later figured out in his career after like a tougher start with injuries. Ja has gotten into off the court trouble. Who knows with the suspension, but obviously we know the caliber of player, like an All NBA caliber player, whether he's going to earn it with games played or not in the next like season or so. He's that caliber of player. And then Wembanyama, San Antonio, and obviously the talent Dallas. Like Houston, not getting like that second pick, but they still have, some intriguing young players that can get better as well too. So that's just a lot of interesting dynamics. There's been a lot of luck in the lottery with the Southwest Division if you're not the Mavericks. So it'll be,
Touche.
yeah, four matchups total per year against those teams, which will definitely be fascinating to kind of see how those different teams develop and kind of shape their rosters as the Mavs kind of like navigate like keeping Luka happy in Dallas, and not kind of making short-sighted moves like jumping the gun, because the more short-sighted moves you make, the tougher it is to gain ground on teams that are stacking up on those types of prospects. now that are going to be developing over the next 3-4 years. So yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic, like kind of in the division for sure.
Yeah, because if Victor Wembanyama is anything that we believe he's going to be a problem for the next 15 years. So the Mavericks get ready to see him 4 times a year in that vaunted Southwest division that will include over the years now Victor Wembanyama, as you mentioned, John Morant, Zion Williamson, and of course our very own Luka Doncic. It's going to be some fun matchups for quite some time. We're hoping, barring obviously injury for these guys for the next several years. Grant, tell everybody where they can find you at and what you're looking forward to on this project here on Inside the Mavs.
For sure. Yeah, you can find a lot of my written work on DallasBasketball.com. I'm going to have a lot of, now that they kept the pick, a lot of content about draft prospects, trade, ideas and targets, and, just keeping tabs on everything that's said about the Mavs as far as, rumors, news, everything. And I'm looking forward to, continuing to do Inside the Mavs as well. I always have a lot of respect for, the work that you do at 105.3. The Fan, and being able to really focus on the Mavs together. I think that's going to be really exciting, especially leading into an off season that's so important. And then next season as well. It'll be fascinating to see how it kind of grows, and I'll get better at talking. You're already a pro at it, so hopefully by episode 5, it'll be good for sure.
Well, this is just the beginning of what should be a fun journey. I'm looking forward to this. This is something that I think Mavs fans are going to enjoy. We're going to bring a lot of different perspectives. You'll hear from different guests from the basketball world as well, talking about this Mavericks team. And as you mentioned, a really important summer, not just what this draft pick could hold if they keep it or if they move on from it. Kyrie Irving, what this team will do to try to build around Luka Doncic. An extremely intriguing summer for this team, building off of, unfortunately, what was a disappointing year, but trying to get themselves back into what is the Southwest Division and, of course, the top of the Western Conference, given how wide open it felt like it was, even though Denver handling business as we're recording this. They won game 1 of their Western Conference final matchup between themselves and the Los Angeles Lakers. There's a lot of work to do for this Mavericks team, but you can find us on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. You can find Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth. Make sure you download the podcast, tell your friends, tell your family about it, be able to give us a 5-star rating, write a review for the podcast as well. We'll be looking to do this a couple of times a week, especially in the off season. If there's any breaking news or anything that happens, try to get an emergency pod up for you just in case something breaks, and we'll be able to break it all down for you here on Inside the Mavs. But really looking forward to this journey with you guys. And if you have any questions, want to have answered on the podcast, we're looking to do all kinds of different stuff here. So Grant, I really appreciate the time, man. Looking forward to doing this here. And Mavericks holding on to the number 10 overall pick. I'm just glad it didn't go to New York, because I would not want to hear New York fans talk about all this all season, off season long, and then the disappointment of not only not making the playoffs, but also having to give the pick to Jalen Brunson. So I'm glad we're off to a good start on Inside the Mavs, at least on that front.
Definitely, for sure. I'm looking forward to it throughout this whole off season for sure.
That has been the first episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. You can find it here on YouTube as well. Subscribe to both my YouTube channel and Grant's channel here on YouTube as well. And until next time, we'll talk to you later. Peace.